Hello, everyone. We are a public hangout. I want to welcome Mr. Coen Gilbert. He's our game changer for the day. This is episode number 14. We're super excited to have him here. Really honored. This is one of the most exciting interviews, just because the role that B Corp has been playing in growing the good economy and making businesses, stand by their mission and actually change their bylaws to align with that. I want to shout out all the love that we're getting on Twitter. Punch Rock, Unsectored, More Than Money Careers, Invest to Innovate, the Calvert Foundation, Punch Rock. I just said that. Saul Garlic and Think Impact. Keep them coming. If you have any questions, we're watching in real time at Blended Profit. Just tweet it in, and with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. So the B Corporation, I love it on your website. You just put it out there. There's 675 B corporations that exist today, 24 countries across 60 industries. They all have one unifying goal. Can you talk about a little bit about the 15 to 20-year vision? I mean, there's a lot more than 675 companies out there. How do we make that 100% of business is done this way?
Yeah, that's fair. I think that at B Lab, which is the nonprofit that does the B Corp certification, is we tend to think about things in generational terms. We recognize that the change we seek, a more sustainable and inclusive economy, isn't going to happen, by Q4. And we're not going to, like, our comp numbers this year over last year aren't going to be the relevant thing. The relevant is, what does the economy look like in a decade, or when our kids are going to school. And so for us, certainly, like, the milestones along the way, like the number of B Corps as they grow, the number of states that pass benefit corporation legislation, all of those things are really important. But as important as all of that is the number of companies that are actually measuring what matters. And so one of the things that B Lab does is we offer the B Impact Assessment as a free and confidential tool for any company anywhere in the world, private or public, small or large, whatever the industry is, to use a very powerful management tool to assess and benchmark and ultimately improve their performance. And now there's already 7,000 companies that are using that. And so I think one of the most important metrics that we look at is the user base of that free tool. If the B corporations are sort of carrying the flag higher and higher up the mountain every year and sort of leading the movement is going to be much broader than folks who decide to be certified. There's plenty of people, for lots of reasons, that will never decide to be certified. And so just measuring that is not measuring the full change that's happening. And if what we're really about is trying to redefine success in business so that one day all companies are competing not just to be the best in the world, but the best for the world, then we have to give them a tool to measure whether they're good, better, best at doing that. And so when we look out 15 or 20 years, what we see is it becoming increasingly common, right, for every company to measure not just its profits, but also its impact. And that's probably the biggest change that B Corps will have created in the economy, is that folks will be measuring not just their profits, but their performance, their social and environmental performance.
Can I get you to make some predictions? About the next generation, 10 years,
The Crimson Tide will definitely win the BCS championship. Guaranteed lock.
Oh, man. All right. I'll put it out there. If you want to bite it, then you can. If not,
go for it.
I meant just in terms of how do we, basically, from what I'm learning is that, there's a lot more businesses in each one of these industries that are doing well by doing good, we say, but they're growing from very small bases. So there may be like 100% growth in like organic, fair trade,
very small
certified
right.
Exactly. So it's looking great. I mean, if you look at it from that perspective, but the U.S. economy not only is the biggest economy in the world, but so that it takes a while to see like material, I think, growth. So I'm just, passionately hoping that one day, I don't know, I want to get some clear, here's what we think want to be when.
Sure. Yeah, so meaning, so if you're looking for metrics, like I can make up metrics with the best of them, and so I think that one of the first things that has to happen is all 50 states will pass legislation, like the legislation that's already been passed in 12 states and is moving forward in another 12 in 2013. That will, first of all, create the freedom for the next generation of entrepreneurs to have a higher purpose to their business than just maximizing short-term profits for their shareholders. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing you need to do is you need to create the platform for this new economy to grow, right, and be strong. And so right now we're at 12, we're going to be at 50, and I believe that the next, that next rollout, the next 3/4 of that rollout will happen over the next 5 years, right? So that's not 15 or 20. I think that's going to happen relatively quickly in sort of geologic time.
No, that's great. That's perfect. Yeah. It's creating the enabling environment.
Right. So the first enabling environment is creating the right legal infrastructure so people can create these companies that are built to last. And so that would be one of the first things I think will happen in the, I'll call that I would call 5 years like a relatively short term. If the B Corp community is 675 today, is that going to grow by 5x or 10x or 20x? Like at the end of the day, who cares, right? Like whether, to be like, I love the B Corps, like they're awesome and they're like the drum majors for justice, and the drum majors for sustainability. But whether there's 600 or 6,000 or 60,000 in the U.S., there are over 7 million businesses in the United States, and so I think if the denominator is always the number of the percentage of overall businesses, I think we're measuring the impact of that community in the wrong way.
Okay. And
so we don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the compound annual growth rate of the U.S. B Corp community is. It's growing rapidly, it's increasingly global. You mentioned that we've gone from being in one country 3 years ago to now 24 countries. And so what you're seeing is like an idea catching on and people wanting to feel like they're part of a community of businesses that are leading. And like anything, whether it was, a revolution, in, the shots heard around the world in Lexington and Concord or in Tahrir Square, it's often a small group of committed individuals through whose leadership inspires the actions of millions. Whether those millions become card-carrying members of this or that isn't really the issue, but you're changing a culture, you're changing behavior. And so I think that the metrics that I'd be looking at if I were looking at the ultimate change will be, of new businesses that are incorporated, what percentage of those are incorporating as benefit corporations, right? Of the entrepreneurs that found businesses coming out of the world's MBA programs, what percentage of those entrepreneurs are making sure that the companies that they start or the companies they go to work for are measuring what matters, right? Measuring their impact on workers, community, environment. And it won't be everybody using the B Impact Assessment. It won't be everybody becoming a certified B Corporation. Hopefully there's a free market with lots of great stuff going on. But those hopefully at the front of the parade are going to be the folks that have met the highest standards and the folks that therefore inspire the most sort of awe in the rest of us. We're like, man, that's freaking incredible that you're running a profitable business and also serving the poor. Or you're running a profitable business that's reconstituting, the incredibly complex food chain. So you're delivering healthy, nutritious food to low-income people in food deserts, and you're doing it and making money, right? Like that's what's inspiring. And so the people that do the best at that will be the rock stars of the new economy that we'll all be inspired by. And then we're all going to follow along on our little, guitars and piano. We're all going to try to play along with them as best we can. But it's ultimately the rock stars that inspire all of us to do things that we didn't think were possible before.
Sounds, I'm super pumped up. I'm ready to just leave right now and go work on B Corp stuff.
Dude, you're doing it right now. A big part of this is there are entrepreneurs that are out there making great things happen, and then there are people who have to tell their stories. And that is an entrepreneurial activity, right? The world needs storytellers and people to connect these messages. Or these messengers, with an audience. And so you're a huge part of the change.
Thank you. One of the things that you said, kind of, I want to open up a little bit. I want to unpack what you said about, some groups aren't going to become B Corps.
Sure.
Why don't they want to become? It sounds like a win-win, no-brainer for me.
Right.
Like, why don't they want to do it?
Right. It's funny. I think that there are a ton of reasons why people do become B Corps, right? From long established companies that are already known as phenomenal businesses, right? The world didn't need B Corp to tell them that Patagonia was a pretty kick-ass company,
Right?
right? And there's 15 million people that have heard about Etsy and how cool they are in creating sort of a people-centered commercial, commerce platform. And King Arthur Flour has been around for over 225 years, and so there's nothing about B Corp that invented anything, right? But to the extent that there's something new and innovative, it's that we all as consumers or as investors are all pretty cynical and skeptical, and probably deservedly so, because right now everybody claims to be green or sustainable or responsible, and so it's useful to have a trusted third party say, hey, these folks are really walking the talk. And so some of the reasons why folks become a B Corp is because it's a really useful differentiator in a cluttered marketplace. And so by getting the B Corp seal, they're able to use that as a pretty good tool in their toolbox to say we're a different kind of company. One step beyond that is B Lab has done a pretty decent job creating PR and content and public awareness around B Corp, because folks like yourself are interested in it, because it's not just another story about doing well by doing good, but there's like substance behind it. There's some rigor behind it that says, and you can go look at it yourself, right? It's all transparent, so you can go knock around and find out what makes that company better. And so the marketing lift that folks are getting with the certification is also a reason why people are becoming a part of the movement. Mm-hmm. Other things are, because B Corps distinguish themselves through their performance, not just through their marketing, there's lots of other entities that want to support B Corps. Whether it's, if you're out there, like at the end of the day, it's about talent, right? It's about people. And so if you can't hire the best talent, you're going to lose, right? If you've got the greatest ideas in sliced bread, maybe it'll take you longer to lose, but you're going to lose. And so if you want to get the best talent wants to work for the best companies. And increasingly, the next generation, the millennial generation, what the best means is that they're the best for the world, not just the best in the world, that they can bring their whole self to work every day, do something, they can make money, they can make a difference, and the places where you're going to go to do that, or you're going to go to do it at a B Corp. So attracting and retaining the best talent is another huge reason why folks are becoming certified B Corps, because it helps them engage their employees and say, this is the kind of place that you'd want to work, because we're going to ask you to work really hard. You might as well work really hard doing something for a company that you're excited about, that's making a contribution to the world. It also helps you attract investors because you get a free Gears rating, and so you're going to be much more visible and attractive to the growing number of impact investors. There's all kinds of great management tools to help you benchmark your performance against thousands of other leaders. There's collaborative sales opportunities that help us drive stuff, and collaborative marketing campaigns that help us build collective voice and break through the clutter. So those are all different reasons. If you're attracting talent and you want to hire someone from Yale or from Columbia or from NYU, that student who comes to work for you as a B Corp is going to get their loans forgiven by that business school. Which means that if I'm a B Corp and I'm recruiting talent from one of those three schools, basically those schools are helping me recruit the best talent by basically paying the signing bonus and part of the annual bonus every year, because the 10 grand in loan payments they got to make every year are basically forgiven by the school, because the school knows they're going to work for a B Corp. That's an example. Or if I'm building a tech business or a sales-oriented business, I get discounts on my CRM platform or NetSuite through my ERP, or if I'm a very small business through QuickBooks, I can get all those things either for free or much cheaper because I'm a B Corp. And there's like 50 or 60 other of those sort of service partnerships that we have.
Wow.
Because people want to support a better business. And so other people are doing it because it helps them save money or raise capital. The reasons why people don't do it are because it's hard. We're not sort of giving out happy face stickers, or and we're not just saying, hey, if you pay some money, you get to join the club. There are real standards that are hard to meet on the performance side, and then there's also legal standards, right? Companies not only have to meet a minimum score on their social and environmental performance, but they also have to amend their articles of incorporation, right? To change the legal DNA of the company, so they're accountable to consider the impact of their decisions on all of their stakeholders, not just their shareholders. And that's a real thing. It's not just sort of printing out a cool mission statement and sticking it up on the wall. Like, you're actually changing your governing documents. And that means if you're a real company with outside investors or aspirations to have outside capital or one day go public, it's a real decision that you have to make and make sure there's alignment, not only for management and founders, but with your board of directors and with your investors, so that you all recognize that the purpose of the business is not only to make money, but it's to make money as a fuel to do something even more important. And that means that it's not for everybody, or at least not for everybody at every life cycle of the business. And so for some people, like a company called New Belgium Brewery, we've been talking with for probably 4 or 5 years, and they just got certified earlier this week. Wow. And that's awesome. They're an amazing wind-powered employee-owned company, but it takes time. They've got other stuff going on. They're growing like wildfire. They're doing incredible things. There are other internal things that have nothing to do with B Corp. They're just like, look, this is awesome, but it's not on my top 10 things to do this week. It took Patagonia 6 years from our first conversation to do it, because everybody's got their own cadence to a business. And when it makes the right time that they want to lead, this is a good place for them to do it, a good platform for them to do it. But most often people don't say no, they just say, not right now. And so it's less often that people are saying, this isn't something I'm interested in, and more often just people saying, this isn't something I have time to do today. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense, crystal clear. I kind of want to use this as a segue to another part of the conversation with respect to, there are these brands that you're saying, these are big brands. These are some of them are even public companies. I want to acknowledge. I was actually there. President Clinton celebrated the B Corp commitments and success at CGI. And this is real stuff that we're talking about. Ben and Jerry's, we all love Ben and Jerry's.
Right.
What I know that they've recently become a B Corp, but there's case studies from Oxford to Harvard that everywhere you go about their commitment to a better mission. What's interesting, when I was at CGI, one of the board members stood up and mentioned that only 15% of consumers knew that they were a good brand.
Right.
And that kind of stuck with me because I feel that consumers have such a large role to play, but and communicating with them to make purchases that align with their values is probably what's going to drive the success of the B Corp economy.
Yep.
So, is there a phase of the B Corp plan that works on that? And if so, can you talk about it?
Sure. I think that's a couple things, a couple reactions. One of the first things is, my bet is that board member was quoting some internal market research, and because the numbers that other people will give you, whether it's Coen or BBMG or the LOHAS research from Natural Markets Institute, or even folks like McKinsey and Goldman that talk about conscious consumers or the LOHAS consumer or cultural creatives or whatever, we'll talk about 60, 70 million Americans that identify themselves as conscious consumers who say, it's important to me what goes into my product, and it's important to me the company that stands behind the product. And so 60 or 70 million Americans is bigger than 15% of the consumption, of the consuming public. So it would surprise me if the number were that low, but let's even take it as that low. Let's even say...
Oh, and just to clarify, I meant 15% of their customers.
Right. But my point is that my bet is that their customers are either average, meaning if 60 or 70 million Americans say that they take into consideration the social and environmental impact of a product when they make a purchase, that's bigger than 15% of the of U.S. consuming public. And so that would mean that Ben and Jerry's customers actually are less concerned about sustainability or their social mission than the average American customer, which I doubt. But like even like let's just take that person's stats as great. So like the first thing you learn as a business person is that the 80-20 rule is generally correct in every industry, in every situation, right? Which is 80% of your revenues will come from 20% of your profits, right? 80% of the work is going to be done, of the great ideas are going to come from 20% of the people in your organization. Like there's a reason for that, like colloquialism or cliche, because it's generally true. Similarly, if you look at most social media communities, most of the content is created or used, and most of the energy is created by a small percentage of the people that are part of that community. Whether it's Malcolm Gladwell's, I forget whether he calls them the mavens or whatever the term is, there's a small group of people that tend to like create the energy. And so let's say he's right, and only 15% of his customers actually knew they were a good company. My bet is that they were a much bigger share of sort of the energy behind the Ben & Jerry's brand. A part of like those customers are people that become evangelists for the brand and talk about it with everybody else. And so they have an outsized impact beyond, I have no idea whether they buy more Chunky Monkey than anybody else, but my bet is they probably talk to lots of people about Ben & Jerry's because they think it's not only great ice cream, but it's a great company. And so I think that if you're a marketing person, it's all about how do you create evangelists out of your core consumers so they carry your message out there. And I think if you want to create evangelists out of your consumers, connecting with your consumers on a deeper level than just the stuff you're selling them is probably a good idea, because most people don't wake up and go to sleep every day thinking of the stuff they buy. They think of other things about what makes their life of meaning, what they can connect to. And so working for a B Corp, investing in a B Corp, starting a B Corp, supporting a B Corp with your consumption dollars links you to something bigger than yourself, which is, you know what, there's a lot of big problems out there. And whatever my political persuasion, government and the nonprofits of the world are really necessary, but they're probably insufficient to the task. And so rather than bellyache or bitch and moan about business being a part of the problem, what if I could support businesses that are being part of the solution? Oh, this is a way I can do that. Oh my gosh, and I get to eat awesome ice cream at the same time, or wear a great PCR polar fleece jacket or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's a pretty good win-win. So even if it's 15%, my bet is that they're an incredibly important 15% for Ben & Jerry's. And I think what B Corp provides is a way for companies to activate and engage that 15%, so it has the biggest impact on creating brand equity and talk value for their businesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And back to the public component. What is your experience of interacting with the public B Corps? I mean, they obviously have a market-to-market daily valuation.
Well, interesting. Just to clarify, well, technically, New Resource Bank out of California is an over-the-counter traded public company, and in some ways, you could consider Ben & Jerry's public in that they're a wholly owned subsidiary of Unilever, which is a public company. But to be precise, there is no B Corp today. There is no certified B Corp today that is publicly traded on the major exchanges. NASDAQ, Amex, New York Stock Exchange. And so, just to clarify, I think in 2013, one of the things we're going to see is we're likely to see the first B Corps go public, so that they would be themselves publicly traded. But today, B Corps are pretty much exclusively private companies.
I mean, and is that just the development of the market, or do you think that's intentional?
I think it's just a natural evolution. I think that, we talked before about the standards are pretty high to become a certified B Corporation. And the most difficult standard is the legal, right? The most difficult standard is that I'm going to amend my articles of incorporation, which requires a shareholder vote, to say that the shareholders are now no longer the only consideration I have. And for an existing public company, to vote that way is pretty unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're going to see is we're going to see a critical mass of B corporations, some of whom are going to be, fast growing in high growth businesses, some of whom are going to feel like the natural path for their business to creating more impact is to use the public markets to create scale and access capital. And so what we're going to see over the next 5 years is the first cohort of B Corps go public, so that somebody at Calvert or other SRI funds is going to put together a B Corp fund, right? A public B Corp fund where you can buy a portfolio of B Corps that are publicly traded. You can get in of them, you can get out of them, whatever it is. That's going to happen over the next 5 years. What's happened to date is more on the private equity side, whether it's credit providers like RSF Social Finance or One Pacific Coast Bank or Sunrise Community Bank out of Minneapolis or whatever, Green Choice Bank out of Chicago. There's a bunch of lenders, right? Because the lending, debt is a much bigger marketplace than equity. And so the first thing is like debt providers coming in saying we want to lend money to good businesses. And then the next tranche of capital is private equity VC money. And so we see scores of early stage and growth stage VCs investing in B Corps. And a lot of them are doing it because they want the impact, and a lot of them are doing it because they think they're going to be better financial investments. So a company like Union Square Ventures out of New York that invests in a ton of the high-flying hockey stick tech companies invested in Etsy earlier this year. And when Etsy announced Union Square Ventures' second round investment, the first thing they announced to their community was that they become a certified B Corp, because they said that helps us make sure that as we grow and bring in outside capital, that we stay true to our mission to create a people-centered economy and to create more economic opportunity for individual artisans around the world. And Union Square Ventures, a guy named Albert Wenger, on their blog that day, he put out a blog, and they're a mainstream, with huge institutional capital, and he said, look, this is good business. Like, this is consistent with our investment thesis, that companies that create, that have a stakeholder, internet-based, web-based companies that are existing in a more distributed stakeholder model, the companies that are going to create the most shareholder value are the ones that are going to pay the most attention to their stakeholders. And B Corp is the highest bar you can meet in creating, effective ESG engagement as a risk mitigation thing, and creating the greatest stakeholder engagement so that all of your stakeholders are engaged in your success as you're creating value for all those stakeholders. And so I think what's happening is you're seeing an increasing number of investors seeking out these kinds of companies because they think they're going to provide positive alpha, right? They think it's going to be accretive to value over time, because we as consumers or we as retail investors are going to say, yeah, why wouldn't I want to support a company like that? So they're going to have higher multiples over time than a traditional business.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's consistent from what I've been talking to, and that's the type of business I'm in, and also we talked to venture capitalist Sean Foote, who says, if you look at all the portfolios of these VC funds, you're probably going to have a social enterprise there, maybe not B Corp, but at least someone
right.
who thinks that has some sort of social benefit to it, but they don't call themselves that. And
right.
if these market incentives are placed in this way, then we have a much bigger cohorts kind of running with the B Corp flag, and that's exactly what we need. It needs
right.
to be good business to do this, and I guess one of the things.
One of the things that's interesting is, so you look at the last 4 or 5 years, right, during the recession, is the private sector economy shed something like 4 million jobs, and during that same period, more than half of the B Corp community grew their job base by more than 5%. Right? Over the last 5 years, and this is consistent over time, half of all small businesses will go out of business in the United States, just because there's churn, right? Business is hard. B Corps are 63% more likely to survive over a 5-year period than your average American small business. And so I think the business case, if you will, for operating with a B Corp model is being built over time, because it's obviously a pretty new phenomenon, so there's not a lot of longitudinal data. but the early indications are pretty cool, right? Is that they have a higher survival rate, they're growing in even down economies, and not only are they growing, but as they add jobs, those jobs are higher quality jobs, better pay, more benefit, more ownership, and the companies are improving the quality of life in their communities through the suppliers that they work with, their charitable giving, their civic engagement, et cetera, and stewarding that community for the benefit of the next generation through their environmental practices. And so we're starting to see what's cool about the B Corp community to me is not just the individual awesome stories of the entrepreneur that's saving the world through X, because there's lots of those, and there's always been lots of those individual stories. What's really inspiring to me is that there's now going to be data to back up the claim that these companies are better for the world, not just better for themselves. And there'll be data that will show, whether it's true or not, that this is better for business as well, right? Better for your bottom line. And we'll get that data in like over the next 5 years as we all of a sudden have, not just 2, 3, 4 years of history, but 8, 9, 10 years of history.
That's incredible. I'm looking forward to seeing that, and it really, it's really inspiring to think of a cohort of public investments that right now the average trade is less than a minute, or even a few seconds.
Right.
But you would think that a B Corp index or would have a different way of interacting with their investments, because it's more of a long term that combats the short termism that is kind of hurting the. Which makes it very difficult to do this if you're already public, I think.
Right. Well, when you mentioned Clinton earlier, and so like when he spoke about B Corps for the first time at Oxford, I forget at what kind of event, but what seemed to interest him, and I don't know how he found out about B Corps, but what seemed to interest President Clinton was the fact that B Corps were addressing the systemic problem in the capital markets. That was the focus on short-termism. And so he said, look, I think this is a pretty interesting thing for folks to look at, because if you're interested, if you think that real societal value and shareholder value is created when you take a long-term approach, well then B Corps are genetically predisposed
exactly
to think for the long term. And that seemed to be what interested in him, and also a guy like the economist out of Yale, Robert Shiller. So there are thought leaders out there that I'm not sure how they're finding out about this, but what they seem to be interested in is the fact that there's a systemic change that B Corps are addressing, which is the idea that they're taking a long-term view, and they're holding themselves accountable to, and therefore are in relationship with all of their stakeholders, not overly skewing to react to the short-term interests of their shareholders.
Yeah, I mean, I'm convinced. I just heard Al Gore speak, and he said it's the capitalism is structurally blind to the use of finite resources. I mean,
right.
And even the person who created GDP as a measure of progress said that it was flawed in this way. But yet success means that we're growing at 8%, and it's just missing out on so many different things that we should be considering. And so,
right. At best, all it does is when there's scarcity, it raises the price. At best. That's what happens, and of course, when that happens, you get things like food riots, and so that's not necessarily like the most thoughtful way to go about building a society that we all want to be a part
of. So, can we just take a moment? You could just run through the B Lab criteria,
sure,
and just to make sure that people get that, and then I just have a few kind of closing
sure
comments or questions.
Yeah, go for it. So you want me to just say like what is required to become a B Corp?
Yeah, what are the different components that you measure?
I see.
And the certification, it's out of 200.
Sure. So in order to become a certified B Corp, companies have to do 3 things. They have to meet higher standards of performance, accountability, and transparency. On the performance side, they have to earn a minimum of 80 points out of 200 available points on something called the B Impact Assessment. Anybody can take it for free, but if you want to get certified, you have to have your assessment reviewed documents attached and sort of basic assurance stuff that makes sure that it is what it says it is. And the different things that are assessed are worker practices, right? Comp and benefits, flex and corporate culture, worker ownership issues. And then you look at other social social criteria like supplier relationships and community relationships in the community section of the survey. So that may be around diversity issues, local, whether you're engaging your supply chain around social and environmental issues, whether your suppliers are coming from low-income communities or are women or minority-owned, or within a local bioregion. And then you look at environmental factors, so there's workers, community, and the third area is environmental factors, which could look at your property, plant, and equipment, right? So the land or property that you're doing, LEED, not LEED, green building, the development, that type of thing.
I want to just kind of pick your brain about the space in general. My opinion is that there's a lot of excitement and hype about this, and we have traction, but we talked about kind of the state of the how big this is in comparison to the rest of the way business is done, and the whole thing with blended profit is we want to grow the good economy.
Right.
Everything we do is dedicated to that. And so, what assumptions or problems do you see in this space that people are making that may be limiting the growth?
I think one of the assumptions that I think limits the growth is that people make the assumption that if you're high impact, that must correlate with low profit, right? That if you're seeking impact, then you can't possibly be as profitable as somebody who's only seeking profit. And I think that's a false assumption. I think that that's lessening. And as I said before about investors like the folks at US Union Square Ventures and others that are increasingly seeing the opposite. But I think that kind of cultural change is hard for people. And so right now it's sort of sitting in people's brains, and their brains are exploding because they're used to a binary world which says either do good or be charitable. And they're at best sequential, right? First do one, then do the other. And I think we're now in a world we're moving into a world that is an and economy, not an or economy. And I think that takes time for people's mindsets to shift. And so I think one of the things that holds people back is sort of hanging on to, clinging a little bit too tightly to an old thought process, which says the purpose of business is to maximize profits, and anything I do that isn't consistent with that purpose must therefore minimize the profits, or make me less attractive to investors, or et cetera. And I think that's culturally, that's one of the biggest things that makes this a slower growth than it might otherwise be.
And I'm sure from your vantage point, you can see. I mean, there's only 24 hours in a day, unfortunately. Yep. And so my last question is, if you mentioned earlier about 12 of the 50 states have passed legislation. I guess the question is, how can we help you and this vision? If you had a clone, what market opportunities would you be focusing on?
Yeah. So I'd say one of the biggest things that people could do today is they could send a message to the folks, the good folks in Delaware, whether it's the bar, the legislature, or the governor, and say, Delaware is the home of the American corporation. You ought to give people the freedom to become benefit corps in Delaware. And so I think one of the most immediate things that could happen is creating this opportunity for folks in Delaware where most people are currently incorporating. And so that's at a very tactical level, but with very strategic ramifications. I think if people wanted to get on board with that, that would be pretty useful. And anyway, so that's that. Broader, I would say from a cloning perspective, other than cloning my partners Bart and Andrew and the rest of the team here, because they're the ones who do all the hard work and the heavy lifting. I'd say the biggest thing is I've always been inspired by Bill Drayton, from Ashoka, who arguably could be credited with coining the phrase social entrepreneur, and for the last 30 years helping to create the movement that you and I are a part of and feeling a part of. His next step in his thinking is about his phrase, everyone's a change maker. And the idea that it's not always about the hero social entrepreneur. It's a false image that if your picture's not on the cover of the magazine, you're not a game changer. And he would say that is not the way the world really works, right? The way the world works is it's the best team that wins. And any team is only as good as every player on the team. And so if you're playing the great game of business, and you think the most important thing we can do in the long run is to redefine what it means to be successful, and the way to help people know how successful they're being is to measure their impact, not just their income, then the thing I would do if I could clone something, I would be cloning the people that are out there asking their the local companies that they purchase from, or their suppliers, or their friends' business, and saying, hey, there's a free, pretty cool tool that you guys can use to measure what matters, and it's going to help you become a better business. It's going to help you attract talent, run your company better. It's going to help you do all kinds of things, from saving money to attracting investors, and it's free, and it's pretty damn useful. And so the first thing I would do if I could clone was I clone the energy that says everyone's a change maker, and the biggest change you can make is get people to at least take the first step, which is to measure what matters. Because ultimately, if we only manage what we measure, then we better measure what matters. And what matters is increasingly your impact on your workers, your community, and the environment, not just your impact on the bottom line. And so that would be the biggest change I would look for.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great way to top it off, and I really want to make sure that I express my gratitude to you for your time and really all the work that you're doing for a better world.
Thank you. Likewise.
And with that, stay tuned next week at Blended Profit. If you want to tweet in your questions, you can watch this video, share it. Stay tuned next week for Virgin Unite.